I'm just going to add one more anecdote. Glenn Reynolds has a new book out called The New School, and he has what I think is one of the more telling anecdotes about our education system. His daughter, when she was in 9th grade, decided she wanted to maybe change her educational situation. So she went to school, her local high school, and she took a watch. And at the end of the day, she calculated the amount of time she actually spent learning throughout the entire school day was roughly 23%. That's when she left school, got into an equivalency program under Kaplan, and then got an internship at the local TV station. So our next speaker is Sam Blumenfeld, whom I've known for 20 years. Sam, many years ago, used to have the Blumenfeld Education newsletter. He has written, I don't know, how many books, Sam?
10 or 11.
10 or 11. Education Necessary is the one that I know. He has one on the NEA, but he also has one very specifically on the practical rudiments of teaching basic education to children. I also might add that it is, let's see, 1944. Sam is a veteran and war hero of the Second World War. At this time, 70 years ago, he was going up the spine of Italy with the, what is it, the 101st in Italy in 1944.
Oh yeah, Italy in 1945.
1945, one year shy. So, anyway, Sam,
Okay.
you have the floor.
I hope you'll indulge me. I don't particularly want to stand.
Fine.
I spent the last Labor Day weekend in a hospital in New Jersey. So this is, I had a debate whether to take part in this discussion. But then I decided that I could make it, provided I had a ride from Waltham, because I could not drive. And I would not even try to park in this area of Boston.
Neither would I.
But in any case, I've done a lot of research on the history of American education. My book, Is Public Education Necessary? It was a history of how the government got involved in the education business. I could not understand how Americans in their early days turned education over to the government. It didn't make sense. And when you read the true history, then you realize that it was the whole idea of government education was imposed by the elite on the American people. They wanted educational freedom. They had private academies all over the United States that were doing very well. And the country was the most literate nation on earth. And their literacy was due to very simple reading programs. I'm sure you're familiar with Noah Webster's Blueback Speller, a little book that you could put in your pocket. And that made America the most literate nation on earth. Why? Because it taught children the English alphabetic system. And it taught them how to read, actually read English, because we have a phonetic system and it has to be taught phonetically. The result was that you had an incredible outburst of independent intelligence. People who could think for themselves and make up their own minds because they understood the logic of language, the logic of grammar, and logic in general. They had very good brains in those days. Well, around the turn of the last century, around the 1890s or so, things changed among the elite. A small group of, you might say, Protestant academics no longer believed in the religion of their fathers. They no longer believed in Christianity. They were basically atheists. And they created the progressive movement. The leader of the progressive movement was John Dewey. I'm sure you've all heard of John Dewey. In 1898, he wrote an essay in which he described how we can change America from a capitalist, individualist nation into a socialist, collectivist one. And he said the way we can do it is to take over the schools and change the way reading is taught in the schools. We have to get rid of the phonetic method of teaching reading because it created independent intelligence. And you can't have a socialist society where people are thinking independently. So he said we've got to change the way reading is taught in our schools. That essay is entitled The Primary School Fetish. And if you read it, it is a plan for a conspiratorial takeover of the American school system in order to get rid of our constitutional republic and replace it. You know what they want to replace it with? A fantasy, a socialist fantasy. And what was the model that they chose? It was Edward Bellamy's book, Looking Backward, published in 1888, in which he fantasized of an America becoming communistic, socialistic in the year 2000. That's the fantasy. And incidentally, that novel is still read in American schools today by teachers who are pushing all of this. Well, in any case, the imposition of socialism in this country started right then. And this group of people were mainly concentrated at Teachers College in Columbia University. And they devised the new psychology, the new behavioral psychology. Edward L. Thorndike created the stimulus response technique. He had experimented on chickens, how chickens learn. And he said, well, human beings are not much different than chickens. And of course, John B. Watson did his experiments with rats, and he thought there's not much of a difference between rats and human beings. Of course, there may not be much of a difference between John Watson and a rat, but there certainly are differences between animals and human beings. The main difference is that yes, animals can be trained. You can train an animal to peck away at a little bit of food, but you cannot educate an animal. Human beings can not only be trained, but they can be educated because they were born with the greatest, most powerful organic instrument in the entire universe, the human brain. And God implanted in that brain the faculty of language. Without language, there cannot be civilization. Without language, you can't have history. You know, human beings write their own history. Cats don't write their own history. Have you ever heard of cat history? Or dog history? No. Only human beings can write history. So I have a great deal of trouble with the theory of evolution, because according to evolution, everything happened accidentally. Well, do you know that the human being has 5 different fluids with 5 different functions? You've got tears, you've got saliva, you've got urine, you've got stomach acid, you've got sweat. 5 different fluids, all with different functions. How could that happen accidentally? How could accident predict the future? All of us are born programmed. We are all programmed at birth. Oh, no, in conception, not at birth. We are programmed at conception. That program decides when you're going to lose your hair, when you're going to grow your teeth. everything. You are programmed and you go through all of these stages of life. Indeed, you go through adolescent, young adulthood, middle age, and then finally you wind up like me, old and decrepit. And why? Because God is preparing you for the exit. He's making life so miserable for you that you would just as well go elsewhere. As a matter of fact, I have a theory of why God programmed us into decrepit old age. He wanted to get even with us. You see, he gives us free will, he gives us youth, and of course we all make a mess of it, you know. God knows what we do with all that freedom and beauty. Look at the American youth today. I mean, look at how they're squandering their intelligence, everything, you know. And God has a way of getting even. He says, okay, just wait a while. You're all going to get there, you know. But in any case, nothing that goes on in the public schools today is accidental. Everything has been planned. Everything. And you know, John Dewey was very clever. He proposed this conspiracy, and he said, change must come gradually. To force it unduly would favor a violent reaction. You see, he knew that people would reject socialism if they knew it was being imposed on them. But you can see it has taken 100 years to the point where we can actually elect a communist to the White House. It took 100 years. And how are we going to get out of this? Well, read my books. First of all, you want to make sure that your child is taught to read correctly. I wrote this in the 1970s, How to Tutor. How to teach your child reading and writing in the traditional manner away from the look-say method. Most of you were probably taught by the Dick and Jane method. Dick and Jane was invented by the Dewey progressives to dumb you down, you see. And America has been severely dumbed down. You look at what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. All those people are dumbed down, functional illiterates who can't use their brains.
Sam?
So they can't use their brains, what do? They act up. They march in the streets, you know. A literate nation is a less violent nation. And that's why we need to restore high literacy in this country. And my phonics book, Alpha-Phonics book, has been used by thousands of homeschoolers to teach their children to read. And I've produced a cheaper edition. This is $30 and this is $12. Because I want the book to get to all of those people in Ferguson who can't read, you know.
Sam?
Well, anyway, I hope that you will read some of my books, read NEA Trojan Horse in American Education, and read Is Public Education Necessary? You can get my books very cheaply on the internet by going to Abe Books, A-B-E Books. Abe Books is a depository of all out-of-print books in the world. And you can get some of my books for very, very little money. Thank you very much.